Hey YouTube, this is Ben Gessel. How's it going? Um, I wouldn't say I've had a rough night, but I'll say that maybe it didn't go the way I wanted it to go. Yeah, yeah, um, yeah. Anyway, um, so something just mentioning this. I've mentioned this subject many times in the past. Got into a lot of imaginative kinds of trains of thought with this, but I'm gonna kind of approach this a little bit different way, I suppose. When I was a boy, the things I forward to the most um, every day were basically, well, Atari video games. Once we had them, Atari was probably one of the top five things I looked forward to the most. It was never music. It was never practicing music because although I loved music, it was not as immediately enjoyable. Anyway, so Atari video games were up there, and I would probably put um, I don't know. Spending time with friends was up there. It was even not quite as high as video games, man. Charles Atari video games when I was a little boy. Um, and I suppose I looked forward to food a little bit, but it was not something that was a very big deal, I suppose. And at least we just didn't have goodies all that often, so I just didn't really think about it very much on some level. I knew what my favorite foods were, but and then um, perhaps I looked forward to hearing music that was very, very beautiful, like unusually beautiful. Uh, but I never knew when that was going to be. There weren't maybe something else I really liked was certain types of TV shows. I think as a boy, and um, I liked spending time with my dad increasingly when I got closer onto 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yeah. And my mom when I was younger, and it seems like the older I get, the more I love my parents. I've always loved my parents, but it's just, yeah. Anyway, but mentioning these hard video games, that was when I was, again, this is when I was 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, even 12, right in that range. Especially 8, 9, 10, 11 years old. And the thing that I looked forward to the most in these games were, generally speaking, how far could I go in the game? And it was like, some games there's all about not getting eaten or jumped on or caught or whatever. It's very basic, arcade games. And I can't believe how entertained I was by them. But there's just nothing else like it out there um, that was interactive that way. I mean, board games are basic, basic stuff compared to video games. But anyway, anyway, um, as I got older, the games improved to a point. Then they became like everything else in the 2000s. I'd say the later 2000s and 2010s. Everything became dumbed down. As I mentioned many times before, and as you mentioned, as you've heard by many other people, all the dumbing down in the media, everything was dumbed down. Nothing was as well done. Very few things were as well done, and we look for those really well done movies or video games, really do, and we just rarely find them. So we end up oftentimes spending less time with that media, um, unless it's something older. It's unfortunate, but so my train of thought here has something to do with exploring, I guess you could say, new ground, more or less, regarding many of the topics I've covered before regarding creative writing in video games and creating fantasy worlds and things. I've noticed, again, like my own brainstorming and things, my own creating things. It's hard to create truly new concepts that really work. Everything from, of course, the variety of landscapes to personalities, characters to main plots or quests, main quests. It's hard not to keep thinking about the same things over and over again. Fantasy is something that should always be endless variety, endless ideas, right? Why is it that we keep getting drawn back to some of the same stuff? It's hard to pull away from the same themes. Why indeed? I guess it's just let's ask a question. What is one's interest in reading a fantasy adventure novel, or playing a fantasy adventure video game, or something like that, or watching a fantasy adventure movie, or something similar? I mean, we're not just limiting. It's not just limited to fantasy, but especially fantasy adventure here. What is the interest? The interest is, I just want to get away for a while. I'm really curious about this or that concept. Or I feel like there's still a lot of something that needs to still be told, uh, or experienced, that I haven't experienced yet or haven't heard yet. And the question is, will we ever hear enough? Will we ever have enough stories? Will we ever have truly enough fantasy adventure video games or movies? Will there ever be a time when we'll say, okay, no more, right? That's it. So, I mean, let's really think about this here, because good and evil exist in many different kinds of fiction. We're not bored by them. We should never be bored by them. They're two eternal constants. There are many other things out there besides good and evil, of course, but they're a big deal, and rightly so. If without good and evil, you have a very different world. And if there's any concept that is very curiosity provoking to a lot of people, it's having a story or a game or a movie where you don't have clear good and evil. You don't have clear moral alignments of characters. I think the topic will just keep getting, it should get more and more common. If it doesn't, some real blockheads out there. If there's a lot of potential for that whole kind of world still. It really is. It's not the sort of world, though, that is very settling. It can be very unsettling. So you have to be in the mood for something unsettling. You have to know. Again, the question is, what what is motivating you? What is motivating anyone to want to watch or see or play something? There has to be things that we're still curious about, and we desire, but we haven't fully satisfied that desire yet, or something along those lines that we're searching for, and we think maybe we can kind of get a little closer to that, meeting these desires by reading fantasy adventure or playing fantasy adventure video games or watching fantasy adventure movies. And by the way, my experience so far has been something like this. With the best of the best that I've ever played, watched, or read, but novels are so many novels. So maybe that's a different thing entirely. But at least with regard to interactive media, it's fantasy adventure. The best of the best I have personally ever experienced, played, seen. The best of that stuff will warm your heart and it fuel your imagination. It will. If the rest of your life. And it'll cause you to be curious, increase your desire to play more fantasy adventure games and watch more fantasy adventure movies. So what's so bad about that? Is there anything bad about that? No. But there's a point in time at which, well, multiple points of time, there's the question of what's actually real in your life that you're searching for in your life. And what many of us want, we often are looking for in fantasy because we don't want to associate with, say, if in a romantic sense, we don't want to be around people that pull us down in any respect. We want to be around people that build us up. In fantasy, good fantasy, high fantasy, can build a person up. If it's something else, if it tears you down, causes you to be depressed, why would you want to see it? Well, yeah, there you go. You see a scary movie because you want to be scared. You don't see a scary movie because you want to be depressed. A lot of people seem to get this wrong, increasingly these days. These moody directors, these morbid directors are making, well, I'd say moody. They're just making these movies that everyone's glum, everything's dark. I don't want to see dark. I want to see frightening. Something that scares you. Or I want to see something that is heartwarming and uplifts you. Obviously, something like that. Why would you see something that wants to make you miserable when everybody's acting like they're miserable? A lot of scary movies, so to speak, have issues like abuse going on and divorces, or it's just ugly stuff. Ugly stuff. Why would you enjoy watching that? Why would anybody enjoy watching that kind of stuff? But that's what we're saturated with. That's what. It doesn't matter if it's a thriller, or if it's. I mean, we try to find stuff that's not like that at all, but it's, yeah. Anyway, so okay, there's a lot of people that are looking for better things in life, and those are the people that we need to be trying to be around more. But let's get back to fantasy adventure here a bit. So we know that there's a limit. There's a limit to which our love of this sort of thing should only extend to. Beyond that limit, you start to get to the point where you're taken over by something. It takes over your entire life, or a lot of it. And that's not healthy, right? Not really. I know some things can be so... I know some things have been that way for me in that realm, but not too many things. And when I've something is kind of I've been taken over by something. When it's all done, I'm like, it felt awesome to play the game, or it felt awesome to watch the movie, or something. But I'm talking more about games, I suppose. But it really did. But then I was like, okay, we can move on to some other stuff. But I mean, this is the stuff that once you play that kind of game, that's what you want to play. You don't want to play anything that's not as good as that kind of stuff, not as immersive, not as meaningful. But that was, I mean, the best. I mean, really, I mean, but then you wonder if you could have better games than that, watch better movies than you've seen that are fantasy related. I don't know. I just know that there are a lot of themes, that you could put out in fantasy literature. Um, there's a lot of different things you can do that have a lot of ways you could tell a story that hasn't been told. There's a lot of ways of doing video games that haven't been done before, or have been done before, but just new characters, new story, and everything. And I don't know. One of the things that is really interesting, because I mentioned this before regarding connections with dreams and fantasy video games, is the idea of when you're dreaming, you can kind of. I'm not saying you can shapeshift. Yes, you can. I'm just saying that there's kind of a magic becomes. I don't know. I'm trying to think how to put this here. I think that it's just that a game can be very enjoyable when, for instance, you're trying to evade some people are trying to kill you, and you cannot defend yourself. So instead of defending yourself, for at least some parts of this game, you have to evade. There's no choice. You have no choice but to evade those folks. So you're running away from them, or you're hiding from them. And there's also maybe some element of the game that involves spying, eavesdropping. Um, and maybe later on you can get tougher and more, you can actually do combat. I think that if there's anything that's missing from a lot of games, it has to do with the extent to which your adrenaline is really pumping and you are really completely immersed and invested in the game. That's one of the things that's missing, really, in a lot of, I think a lot of great adventure game would be like a great fantasy adventure game. These colorful point-and-click adventure games that I'm sometimes drawn to on Steam don't seem to be really doing it for me. I've never really gotten into them. They make the puzzles too obscure a lot of times. You just don't want to finish the game. You love the artwork, and then it's basically done. So if you come back to it, it's just like, oh, well, I don't know. And yeah, I mean, so being creative with how to evade pursuers, spying or eavesdropping, figuring out puzzles a little bit, sure, and a little bit of combat, a lot of figuring out different characters and what they're up to, whether or not to trust them. This is some of the core of what I think should be in a lot of great fantasy adventure video games and movies still. So why are video games superior to movies in some respects? Well, because you can control what actually happens. You're in charge, not some other. You're not just passively watching something. A video game will always beat out a movie that way, but video games are still not where movies have been. They're just it still needs to, I don't know. I feel like this is a subject that I keep harping on a little bit. Like some people harp on certain other topics. It's because I just, I feel this very strongly myself. I really do. I find that the topic of level creation, even if it's just something you're brainstorming and not, it's not, you're not having immediate plans to make it into a game, or you just don't know how to. But it's 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 just endlessly interesting to me that there's different ideas you can do level creation and how it might apply to a main quest or not. But I think it's interesting though to have. Um, I keep thinking color is such a big deal. On old Atari games and some of the older games I played, like Loom, color was, along with music, was featured very prominently in these games. And you had certain areas that were dominated by one or two colors. It affected the mood, of those settings. And this is very apparent in Loom, for instance. LucasArts game. It was just so, nighttime, how you're feeling at night, everything's dark, as opposed to daytime and cheerful green grass and green castle and, you know, trees and sheep. And then you have a dragon's lair, and you have a cave, and you have like a blacksmithy type area. It's all red, lots of reds and blacks and grays and browns. And then you have like a kind of a space type area at the end of the game, or tower going out in space. So just it's interesting to think about creating games based somewhat on going to these different kinds of places. And it's interesting to think about questions that we have that haven't been fully answered that a video game explores. But I don't know, just to sum this up here a little bit. It's just we love the kinds of games and movies and books that build us up, that add something to our psyche, that it's uplifting and it's enriching and it's that's what we're always searching for. It doesn't have to be fantasy, but when it comes to things like entertainment and books, that's what I think a lot of us are looking for, or something that's just was mysterious or whatever. We're not looking. We don't want to be depressed. We don't want to be bored. We don't want to be. We don't want to be saturated with the mundane aspects of life, or the gloomy, or the dismal aspects of life. That's not what we want at all. We want something different. Many of us. The kind of person who enjoys very dark, gloomy, mundane, angry people. If they enjoy, some people enjoy that kind of media. It's a very rare breed. I don't know. Some people maybe enjoy it because it's not fake to them. Because so many people seem fake. Well, anyway, I kind of covered this topic a little bit earlier, but I think that there's a lot of people that, they're still trying to work things out in their lives. We call them fake, but I don't know. Sometimes it comes down to what you tolerate better in certain kinds of people, and sometimes it comes down to, I don't know. Anyway, leave me thoughts and comments below. I'll catch you guys later. Take care. Bye.